Scott, thank you very much for the 6 months. We will get into talking all about NHL free agency. I'm honestly going to treat this as shout out to Ivory for the 69 months, by the way. Very nice. I have
that with the Patriots jacket, and of course he's been asked to leave the ball game.
Excuse me, we're leaving that in. Anyway, I'm gonna kind of treat this like either its own video or a podcast. I don't know. You might see this pop up on podcast feeds on the main channel. I don't know. We'll see. And shout out to Rahil for immediately getting bopped. I will eventually talk all about free agency, trades, all of that stuff, but that is not the biggest story of the day, although I wish it was, right? Because a couple hours ago, I was like, man, this is sweet. We'll talk all about free agency. This is going to be fun. And then the NHL, in typical NHL bullshit fashion, tried to be sneaky, but they don't know how. They really don't know how. The NBA, MLB, NFL, they're all kind of good at sweeping stuff under the rug without too many people noticing. The NHL sucks at it. Shout out to Aiden for the 70 months, by the way. Again, very much appreciated, everybody.
Jacket, and of course he's been asked to leave the ball.
So as expected, we have news, right? We have news, and let me switch this over to the proper one because, of course, it was not the proper one. The big news of the day is not Steven Stamkos, it's not Slavkovsky, it's not anything else. It's this right here from the NHL announcing that former GM of the Chicago Blackhawks, Stan Bowman, former head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks, Joel Quenneville, and Al McIsaac, who was also with the 2010 Chicago Blackhawks team, have been reinstated. And to specifically get you Al McIsaac's title, he was the Director of Hockey Administration and then was promoted to VP of Hockey Ops with the Hawks until he resigned in October of 2021 in the aftermath of the Kyle Beach story breaking. This is something that we all pretty much knew was coming because we have had this conversation numerous times. If you are talented enough or perceived as talented enough to help a hockey team win and make money, you will be given as many chances as is required. It does not matter if you are front office staff, a coach, a player, you will be given any amount of opportunities. Now, the response to this has obviously been incredibly unpopular. There are some people who are trying to defend this, but a quick little reminder of the story, because it's funny. You cannot go to the 2010 Chicago Blackhawks Wikipedia page without seeing the sexual abuse scandal tab, and I'd like to remind you all to take a little bit of a look over this, right? As it details the complete lack of action in regards to numerous members of the Chicago Blackhawks front office, resulting in a former video coach, Brad Aldrich, not only getting away with sexually assaulting hockey, professional hockey players, but also getting away with then subsequently being accused of sexual assault at Miami University in Ohio, and then later being convicted of having sexual contact with a minor while serving as a high school assistant coach in Michigan. These subsequent two incidents took place solely because of the Chicago Blackhawks inaction. And people wonder why some people still laugh about the Blackhawks and, of course, their now deceased owner, when a year on he tried to say, we're moving on, everything's fine. Well, that's what the NHL is trying to do now. They are trying to move on, and they're saying that, hey, they're good to come back. And, oh, don't worry, come back they will. As has been reported by numerous people, E.J. Radick, the most recent, Stan Bowman is going to be the next general manager of the Edmonton Oilers. What a punishment. What a punishment. Now, Frank Saravalli had this to say, or quoted this from the NHL's announcement today in regards to the reinstatement. The National Hockey League today announced that effective immediately, Stan Bowman, Al McIsaac, and Joel Quenneville are eligible to seek employment in the NHL. For more than the last 2.5 years, oh boy, 2.5 years worth of punishment for a minor being sexually assaulted because of you. What a punishment. Anyway, for more than the last 2.5 years, these individuals have been ineligible to work for any NHL team as a result of their inadequate response upon being informed in 2010 of allegations that Blackhawks player Kyle Beach had been assaulted by the club's video coach. While it is clear that at the time their responses were unacceptable, each of these three individuals has acknowledged that and used their time away from the game to engage in activities which not only demonstrate sincere remorse for what happened, but also evidence greater awareness of the responsibilities that all NHL player personnel have, including personnel who are in positions of leadership. Fair question from me. What activities? What activities? Specifically, what activities? I'm intrigued. Who have they worked with? Who have they talked to? What have they done specifically? Right? I think that's fair. Specifically, what have they done? I feel like that's a worthwhile thing to know. But the NHL doesn't seem to think so. The league expects they will continue this commitment in any future capacity with the NHL and or one of our clubs. While clubs are free to discuss potential employment opportunities, they will not be permitted to enter new employment relationships until July 10th. So again, you could have easily announced this on July 9th, July 10th, whatever. But no, you tried to slip this in on fucking free agency day because you were hoping the news cycle would muddy it up and a lot of people wouldn't even hear about this. Judging by what I've seen in chat, there you go. That worked for some people up until this point. So again, you have these individuals that are going to be given another opportunity. Again, eligible to seek employment on or after July 10th. Make no mistake, Stan Bowman knows what team he is going to. Stan Bowman absolutely knows what team he's going to. And I'm pretty confident Joel Quenneville will know what team he's going to as well. It's the NHL. Tampering happens. It's not a coincidence that over $1 billion worth of contracts have been signed today on the first day of free agency. You know that some of these guys have known where they were going to be signing for at least a couple of days, if not longer. So, yeah, Joel Quenneville knows where he's going to be coaching. My bet's Columbus, by the way. They had no shame in bringing in Mike Babcock. My guess is they'll go for Joel Quenneville unless they have actually developed a fucking spine and would rather actually try to bring in a coach that might be able to do something instead of relying on guys that haven't accomplished anything in 10 years. But of course, there are people who are trying to defend this, right? Because why wouldn't they? Oh, and by the way, before we get to that, friendly reminder, the Chicago Blackhawks are still being sued. That's the big thing to remember. They are still currently being sued. They are in a lawsuit right now with John Doe 2, who is still unnamed at the time. So, it's been 2.5 years. Dude, the fucking lawsuits aren't even settled yet, and they're letting these guys back into the league. It's insane. Now, the defense for these two comes from this. Today it was reported by Quenneville's own daughter, Anna, that victim Kyle Beach from the 2010 scandal had given Quenneville his blessing to return to the NHL. Again, she tweeted on May 13th of this year. Kyle called my dad after going on Andy Strickland's podcast, gave him blessing to coach again. And of course, there is a follow-up from Andy Strickland on his podcast with Cam Jansen mentioning Kyle Beach has given his blessing, which, you know what? Props to Kyle Beach for finding that within him to forgive and allow somebody to move on. He deserves a hell of a lot of credit for that. However, Kyle Kyle Beach is not the only victim. He was a direct victim at the NHL level, but there are other subsequent victims because of the inaction of the men that were just reinstated, including Joel Quenneville. And again, if you go through this article, it talks, or not even the article, if you just go through the fucking Wikipedia section that has concised all of this, it talks about the inaction up and down the order from Chicago that led, again, exactly to further incidents involving Brad Aldrich. So there is that. J-Rod, thank you for the 42 months.
Jeez.
So,
unnecessary.
is it believable that Kyle Beach has forgiven Joel Quenneville and is all right with him going back into the league? Of course it is. Is Kyle Beach's personal progress and acceptance and him being an incredible individual, is that enough when there were other victims, one of whom, again, is still involved in an active lawsuit in regards directly to what happened? The people you have speaking up right now, again, Kyle Beach hasn't said anything specific. We're not owed that. Nobody's owed that. But these reports are coming from Joel Quenneville's daughter and Andy Strickland. Now, I'm not calling Andy Strickland's integrity into question, but there is no denying, obviously, that this is a very blues-themed, heavy podcast. And Andy Strickland has worked directly with the St. Louis Blues. And, of course, Cam Janssen is a former St. Louis Blues player from St. Louis. Color me shocked that he would have some loyalty to that team. If I'm not mistaken, by the way, just one little quick fact check here. I don't want to throw anything out there and be wrong about it. But Joel Quenneville, let's see, stopped coaching the Blues in 2004. That was right before Cam Janssen got there. So I can't say that Cam Janssen has loyalty to an older coach. But what I can say is, despite some people saying, oh, Kyle Beach said this, and hey, they could very well be right, it's pretty fucking embarrassing for the NHL to reinstate these three while an active lawsuit's still going on. And again, it's not even the fact that it's a surprise, because of course it was going to happen. It's just more so the audacity of trying to sneak it under the rug as free agency begins. Happy Canada Day, by the way. I meant to open with that to all the Canadian friendos there. This is gross, and it continues to be gross, and it sucks. I give fair credit to anybody that is like, you know what, I just don't care. The NHL is the best hockey league in the world. What other fucking option do I have? What can I do about it? Shitty people exist. You buy shoes, you should probably feel bad about buying shoes. There's all these fucking evil-ass corporations. The NHL is one of them. Surprise, surprise. What can I do about it? And I don't necessarily blame people for having that opinion, but I also don't think that it's necessarily worth being like, oh, well, fuck it, too bad. Which is why, again, this is the biggest story of free agency. It's not Steven Stamkos going somewhere else. It's not what this team got for this player and trades and all of that. This is the biggest story today, and it has been a continued theme of the NHL over the last 3 years now, is the fucking on-ice product has been secondary, essentially, at least to me, because it's kind of difficult to just be like, I'm not going to look at this. Ooh, look, talented players. Again, if you can do that, cool. I certainly struggle with it, whether it be this, the Hockey Canada scandal. I can't wait. How soon, by the way? I know Dylan Dubé signed in the KHL. How soon until someone's just like, we'll sign Carter Hart for league minimum just in case? Because you always got to be thinking ahead, you know. You always got to be thinking ahead. It's just gross. Like I said, today should be about the fun of who signed where and the trades that have happened and all of that. Again, there's been a fucking 165 signings with over $1 billion worth of total contract dollars handed out. But at least to me, that's not the big story of the day. And it sucks. It'd be nice if it was, but again, the NHL it's just fucking gross. I just want to be able to enjoy the hockey without fucking horrible people fucking it up. But that's difficult to do. Incredibly difficult to do. So, the NHL continues to be a shit show of a league, but as a hockey fan, what other fucking choice do you have, really? You don't. You know, if you're a wrestling fan and you're grossed out by WWE and their history, Cody, I did, by the way. Sorry, I'm on a rant. You know, if you're a wrestling fan, you could be like, oh, WWE's history, it's kind of gross. At least there's other promotions and stuff like that, whether it be AEW or New Japan or something independent, whatever. Hockey-wise, what league do you have that isn't so intrinsically tied to the NHL? Yeah, you have the SHL and Liga and the KHL, but at the end of the day, the vast majority of those leagues are, of course, directly tied to the NHL, whether it be prospects or the best players coming back over. You have to go far down the ladder to like the fucking Federal Hockey League or the SPHL to find a league that's not so intrinsically tied to the NHL, and it's gross-ass bullshit. But anyway, I'm not opposed to still talking about the fun things that happened today, because fun things are fun to talk about, and I'm happy to do so, but can the NHL just get its shit together, man? Can they just get their shit together? Again, whether or not it's shit like that or the DOPS and all of that fucking nonsense, the NHL can make it really difficult to enjoy their league. Anyway, I'll talk about the actual hockey because people are going to want to know. People do. The chat's there. So, in regards to the moves that have happened, I want to start off with the trades, and I am going to go team by team in terms of the signings. Riley Smith ended up getting traded to the New York Rangers. The Penguins, it's funny because Riley Smith is actually older than Kevin Hayes, so despite acquiring Kevin Hayes, they have now gotten younger by ditching Riley Smith. It's a good pickup for the Rangers, especially on that cap hit. For the Penguins, they get some more draft picks back, which is very good for them. We'll talk more about the Penguins and whatever the hell they're trying to do shortly. Washington gets Jacob Chychrun for, Nick Jensen and a third. If Chychrun sticks around, not a bad deal. Nick Jensen is a solid second, maybe more ideally third pair defenseman. It's a good deal for Ottawa because it's obvious the Chychrun thing just wasn't going to work out long term. And the Capitals just continue to make moves that put them into a different light because it wasn't all that long ago where you're like, oof, they're done, basically, right? Montreal got a 4th round pick for John Kovacevic. Fine bit of business for both teams. Habs probably weren't going to have space for him. Devils get some depth. You had a minor league trade, Svechkovsky for MacArthur. That is what it is. And then obviously we'll talk about Jake Gensel in a second. So in terms of the signings, we'll go alphabetically. Why the hell not? Okay, Utah is in there. That's good. So the Anaheim Ducks today haven't done anything as of 7:40 p.m. Eastern on July 1st. That's a choice. That is a choice to have not done anything. It's June 31st on their calendar, right? Their prospective depth chart right now is this, and again, it highlights the fact that, like, okay, Cutter Gauthier is, he's going to be there. You still got the younger guys like McTavish. That's pretty much what they're going to be looking to do. We'll still see if they end up trading John Gibson, but they're going with a lot of their younger talents and trying to build around. Apparently, they signed Brett Leason. Oh, Cap Friendly doesn't have it yet, but cool. They kept Brett Leason. What a deal. What a deal. You could argue about who they should have gone after to try and improve the team, but I think there's lessons to be learned from the likes of Detroit and Ottawa over the past season or so, and that is don't try to grow too fast because you might find out you're not as good as you thought you were. Honestly, the Ducks can fall into that category. I don't think anybody thought they were going to be as kind of mid, if not outright bad as they were this past year, so if I'm a Ducks fan, I don't hate the way they're going about it because, again, they're going to have a lot of younger talent. They're not trying to rush things. No signings on, day one of free agency can always be concerning, but it's not like, oh, my God, they're screwed, right? So that's that. Not too much to say about them. For the Boston Bruins, they have been busy bees. signing Nikita Zadorov to a 6-year deal with a $5 million cap hit. He has already said do not call him Big Z anymore, which is great. Elias Lindholm. It happened. The worst kept secret in hockey. Elias Lindholm for 7 3/4 for 7 years. Max Jones comes over from the Ducks. 2 years, $1 million hit. That's not bad to compete for the bottom 6. Riley Tufte, who once upon a time, as an NCAA player, looked very promising when he was with Minnesota Duluth, but has just never really panned out at the NHL level. He's not a bad AHLer. But, as we know with the Bruins, oh, you're huge? Okay, we'll sign you. And that's what that is. And then Jordan Osterley, Cole Kopke, Billy Sweezy, tremendous name, and Jeff Viel, who is a gritty boy. So a lot of depth. Obviously, the two big signings are Zadorov and Lindholm, and the fact that they have yet to re-sign Jeremy Swayman. In terms of that prospective depth chart, there is no denying that Elias Lindholm is an improvement on Pavel Zacha or Charlie Coyle as a number 1 center. And especially, too, if you're able to successfully pair him with David Pastrnak. I don't know if I view Elias Lindholm as a true number 1 center. I don't think I do. At least that was my opinion before. But it also, for where the Bruins are right now, makes sense to get Elias Lindholm instead of holding out on hope that Leon Draisaitl becomes available a year from now, right? So they make a move now to try and stay competitive. I am still worried about, like, okay, is Morgan Geekie going to be the second line right wing? And obviously we'll talk about departures once we get to the teams that they went to, aka Vancouver. It's a fucking big physical bottom 6 with the exception of Matt Poitras. So that's interesting to go and almost like double down on the defensive first physical style, especially when you had trouble scoring in the playoffs. But you could argue, like, oh, do they feel like they got kind of out-bullied by the Florida Panthers? And maybe. But then again, that's what Vancouver did when they were out-bullied by the Bruins in the 2011 final. They went full grit, and they blew the rest of the Sedins' careers. So you don't always want to be overly reactionary to one specific opponent and one specific loss or set of losses. Defensively, look, for the record too, with the Lindholm cap hit, that's the nature of the beast. That's what it was going to be. I don't think it's the worst contract in the world. Do they still have? They do still have the compare contract. Obviously, we're about to lose cap friendly. But when you compare it, it's closest to the Nazem Kadri deal or the Mark Scheifele deal. You know, I mean, again, if you're going to pay a guy like that, I mean, neither of those two guys are the guy, but a second line, he's ideally more of a second line center. Let's be honest. Is it a bit of an overpay? Yes, but every fucking free agent signing is a bit of an overpay. I don't think it's the worst contract or terms in the world at first glance. And the obvious thing is any contract that looks good can end up being shit. Any contract that looks like garbage can end up being good. Sergei Bobrovsky just won a Stanley Cup. Opinions have changed. So that is something to keep in mind. Could it be a good contract? Yes. Could it be a bad contract? Of course. Time will tell. I don't hate that term. Zadorov is the interesting one. Right, signed through 2030 at $5 million, but as has been said, he is such a Bruins player. Again, they get bigger, they get more physical. That's what they're going for. They don't have a defenseman listed under 6 foot on this prospective depth chart. The big thing now is Jeremy Swayman, and obviously too defensively, Mason Lohrei very much has to be factored into those top 6 plans. Their roster outside of signing Swayman is pretty much established. It's just a matter of whether or not some of the younger guys, Georgi Merkulov, Fabian Lysell, if some of these guys will crack the team out of camp and change things a little bit. But in terms of who's going to play games this year, I imagine that roster is going to be pretty damn close to what the Bruins are actually going to run this year. It should be playoff caliber, especially if last year's roster was playoff caliber. Is it going to be good enough to hang in there with the big boys of the Eastern Conference? Time will tell. I don't think it's a god-awful day one for the Bruins. Like, they are better. Lindholm and Zadorov are better. It's just, how much better are you? How much closer are you to a cup? And again, they are one of numerous teams where it's like, whatever. We'll hand out the term. We'll deal with that once we have to deal with it. They were far from the only team to do that. The Buffalo Sabres, outside of buying out Jeff Skinner, which was a little bit surprising, they haven't done too much in terms of impact moves. Sam Lafferty, 2 years, $2 million, not that bad. Solid bottom sixer. Giving Jason Zucker $5 million is interesting. That is a cap whale contract, and in that case, why wouldn't you just keep Jeff Skinner? The benefit is, it's only a year, but Jason Zucker hasn't been what Jason Zucker used to be for a very long time. So that confuses me, the idea of we're going to buy out Skinner, but then sign Jason Zucker. Bryson, Gilbert is depth, Aube-Kubel for bottom six depth, Brett Murray, Jobs, Rathbone, Sandstrom, done. A lot of depth moves that really, don't shake up the picture too much for Buffalo. It's just, the Jason Zucker signing after buying out Jeff Skinner is very, very odd. And then giving up a second-round pick for projected fourth liner Beck Mallinston is also interesting. If I were a Sabres fan, I don't know how confident I would be about the playoff drought ending. Like, there are young guys that'll hopefully be better. Hopefully, like, Tage Thompson will get back to form. I mean, a 29-goal season was a down year for him. I don't know how optimistic I'd be about this team right now, aside from, the youth is good, but it's just like what they're surrounding the youth with is kind of bizarre, right? It's like you got Bowen Byram last year, and that was solid. Like, I don't know. It's weird, especially, too, if they go with Luukkonen and Levi in goal. That's got to be the youngest tandem in the league, right? So, big question mark on the Sabres this year, because I think all three possibilities are kind of even. They could be a playoff team, they could be nowhere near the playoffs, or just miss out, kind of like they did this year. I don't know. I'd feel really, really weird about the Buffalo Sabres. Kevyn Adams, has been the GM there now for 4 years, which is kind of crazy that he's been there that long. It's starting to become time where the pressure's on a little bit for him to make the playoffs, you would think. Even though, of course, he has a history of being with the Sabres now since 2011, at least as a coach. You would think that seat's getting just a smidge hot. Like, you want to give GMs time, but what is exactly the direction with the Sabres? I don't know, aside from just the youth is going to play. But the Bruins, buy into it or not, I mean, their freaking goal this offseason was clear. Let's get mean. Let's get mean. And that's what they're doing. I don't really know what the Sabres' goal is from the outside perspective. Calgary. Obviously, they've been stripping away pieces. Markstrom's gone. Mangiapane's gone. They brought in Anthony Mantha on a one-year prove-it deal, which is fine at $3.5 million. Devin Cooley's an AHL-level goalie. They gave Sharon Govich the bag, which is interesting, but given the trade that he was a part of to acquire him, which, a reminder, was the Tyler Toffoli to New Jersey deal, you kind of wanted to commit to that. A prove-it deal for Jake Bean after leaving the Blue Jackets. Stanley Cup champion Ryan Lomberg comes over, and they sign Martin Ferk, who will probably mostly be an AHLer, as he's been for the last little bit. They have a shitload of cap space still, and the goal is quite simple, even though, by the way, they do not have their own first-round pick. That belongs to Montreal in the deal that sent Sean Monahan to the Habs. That sucks to not have their first-round pick in this upcoming year. That is brutal, because they are not going to be a very good team. Having New Jersey's and Florida's is okay, but those are playoff teams. Vegas is a playoff team as well. So again, the Habs having that pick is amazing for Montreal. Absolutely amazing. But woof. Calgary pick will probably be Florida's for Montreal. Should I double check things? Conditional. If Calgary's 2024 first between 20 and 32, Montreal can take that pick. That's not going to happen. In the event Calgary receives Florida's first round pick, both Calgary's pick is top 10, Florida's pick is not. So in fairness, yes, it could end up in a lot of different places. Either way, it's not ideal to not exactly have control of that pick, is it? Point remains. And again, if you look at their projected depth chart, again, who the hell knows? We'll see what happens. There's no moving Jonathan Huberdeau. There was talks about trying to move Nazem Kadri. Who knows? But this is a team that is kind of being put together with the, well, maybe we'll be good, but if we're not, that's okay type of mindset from the looks of it. Maybe Anthony Mantha will be good, but if he's not, all right. Maybe Andrei Kuzmenko will be good for us. If he's not, okay. Maybe a younger guy like Connor Zary will be able to make more of an impact. If not, okay. Get some grit. You got Coronado in that lineup now. You got Kevin Ball. You got Jake Bean. I mean, they're not going to be a very good team. Flames fans, I think, will have to look towards the young guys, especially Dustin Wolf in goal once they sign him, to try and find some optimism this year, because it just... Let's be honest, at least on July 1st, 2024, it would be surprising to talk about Calgary being a playoff team next year based on how this team looks. Like, this is I stripped away my pieces in NHL franchise mode to get a shitload of draft picks level of defense, right? Like, there's a lot of maybe this guy will be good kind of filler there. So, it's a very interesting time for Calgary in the aftermath of that Jonathan Huberdeau pickup. Carolina obviously traded away Jake Gensel. Today they signed Eric Robinson for a one-year deal cheap. They brought back Jordan Martinook, basically 3x3, which is a bit pricey. They kept Jacob Slavin 8 years, 6.5. 8-year deal for a 31-year-old defenseman. Again, we've seen a lot of that in free agency. We're going to see more of it. It's good for them to have kept him. William Carrier, 6 years to get the cap hit down to $2 million. Former Golden Knight, former Stanley Cup champion going to Carolina. You got Tyson Jost coming in for dirt cheap. They brought in Shane Gostisbehere, 3 years at 3.2, which could be a phenomenal contract. And Sean Walker, 5 years at 3.6. So the Hurricanes have completely rebuilt their defense in the aftermath of losing Brett Pesce. We still don't know what's going to happen with Martin Necas and whether or not they're going to sign him or deal him. The talk about that has gone quiet, to say the least. Adding Robinson and Carrier for the fourth line isn't bad. That defense, Slavin, Burns, Orlov, Chatfield, Gostisbehere, Walker, that might be the strongest six in the league. It might be. However, if you're still relying on playoff Frederik Andersen come playoff time, I'd be kind of scared. Right? I'd be just a little bit scared if I'm still relying on Freddie Andersen if I'm a Hurricanes fan. But maybe this is the year that Kochetkov takes over, right? Maybe it is. So, yeah, I don't think Carolina's in that bad of a spot. I don't think, Canes fans should stress too much about some of the cap hits, some of the term that they handed out. I mean, they're still going for it, right? Like, they elected to keep Rod Brind'Amour as the coach, which is the right move. Eric Tulsky finally took over as the GM. They're still going for it. So that's optimistic for Canes fans. We've seen it before. A couple of changes here and there can finally get a team over the line. The Dickbags, Chicago. Let's be honest, this is completely irrelevant as compared to what's actually going on today, but that's fine. They signed Tyler Bertuzzi, 4-year deal, $5.5 million. Good for him. I mean, he's going to be a key player on that team for the next couple of years because he's going to be one of the better players on that team. And that's kind of the theme, is let's bring in veterans, right? Alec Martinez, 1-year deal, $4 million at 36 years old. Brossoit, 3.3. Craig Smith for $1 million. They brought back Teuvo Teravainen. He got a nice little payday. They brought in Patrick Maroon and then Joey Anderson and, of course, now TJ Brody at 3.75. They have a shitload of cap space. They're bringing in veterans to fill it up. And, yeah, I mean, they're still probably not going to be a very good team. They'll probably be better than they were last year, especially if Taylor Hall plays more than 10 games, which I think most people think that he will. That top line, if that is indeed the top line, could be very good. Again, Teravainen now with Mikheyev, who they just picked up. Mikheyev could be really good for them. This is the type of team, even on defense, bringing in like Martinez and Brody, now having Mrazek and Brossois in goal. This is the type of team that a fan base can get a little bit optimistic about, right? This isn't we're going to have a miserable season roster. This is, okay, we're not going to be good, but we're not going to be trash. We're going to have some positives. There's going to be some veterans that we like to see. Some of the young guys are going to get a chance. And, insulation for the superstar and Connor Bedard. So it's going to be a much more enjoyable year for Hawks fans. Although, again, their ownership can suck a gigantic fat one. Colorado hasn't done a whole heck of a lot. Potential wildcard spot? That might be a stretch. Lucky, yes, those episodes are still going up. There's actually, for the Colorado one, I think we hit our end for that one. But there's other stuff all the time. This franchise mode's the one thing I actually still kind of enjoy hockey-wise at this point. Colorado kept Jonathan Drouin 1 year, $2.5 million. That's a pretty good deal, right? Like, he had arguably his best season as a pro because he was next to Nathan McKinnon for a decent chunk of it. Halifax reunited. That's a good spot for Jonathan Drouin to be. However, by the way, I never talked about this. Casey Middlestat getting almost $6 million. That would make
the man
Lucky
was a
Jim, thank you for the
fanboy.
follow. That Middlestat deal would make me more nervous as an Avs fan than I am nervous for Lindholm's deal with Boston. That is, I know Middlestat's had some good point totals, but still, that's an interesting one because you're banking on him getting a little bit better. Again, he's had a couple of good seasons in a row now, but that's an interesting one. It's an interesting deal. Very happy to see Mr. Kiviranta, as we deemed him 7-8 years ago, totally Spanish, sticking around in Colorado. Happy for that guy. Calvin DeHaan, dirt cheap, and then Parker Kelly, dirt cheap for the bottom six. Let's be honest, the Avs didn't have to do much, right? You have Nathan McKinnon, you have Rantanen. Technically, we'll see what happens with Landeskog. He never came back for the playoffs. Who knows if he'll ever come back? And then, of course, you have the very awkwardness of the awkwardness of the Valerian Nichushkin situation. But Georgiev, Eustace in goal. I mean, that's still a little bit concerning for Georgiev, but their core is intact. It's just a matter of trying to retool things a little bit, especially bottom six, third pairing, stuff like that, and seeing if the team can make another charge. And I don't think anyone will put it past them. If you were to tell me right now, hey, in a year you're going to be talking about Colorado being Stanley Cup champions, of course that's a more than viable, way to see everything play out, for lack of a better term. Colorado did something. Columbus has done pretty much nothing. Aside from keeping Owen Sillinger, their big move is giving Sean Monahan 5.5 over 5 years. Good for Sean Monahan. I don't know where I have the jersey. I don't know if it's on the wall or not. We do have the Monahan jersey, of course. Shit, it's right here. There you go. Good for this guy. Good for Sean Monahan, whose career looked like it was dead. He gets traded from Calgary in a move where Calgary's like, please, Montreal, just take this guy, to finding his footing and getting a really solid contract from the Columbus Blue Jackets. Calgary's a major loser in this deal. Again, no current head coach for Columbus. It's going to be Joel Quenneville. Joel, all you have to do is just not tell a young player to hand you their phone, and you should be fine. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. You should be fine. You've been going through programs and stuff over the last 2.5 years. You'll be fine. It's going to be Joel Quenneville. But for Columbus, the Monahan move certainly feels like a, hey, Johnny, we need you and your buddy signed to the same term to figure shit out. Please, Johnny, figure it out. That's what that screams. Obviously, Columbus is in an interesting situation, right? Like, you look at the ages of these forwards and how many young guys are speculated to be able to be in that lineup next year. Obviously, they still have some concerns. Devitron, thank you for the 6 months. Nothing yet, at least that I've seen for Swayman. Aside from things are, maybe not going swimmingly, negotiating-wise. But, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a younger team in Columbus. Do they have the aspirations to make the playoffs? Probably. Are they going to be able to? And again, Joel Quenneville, really good at certain aspects of his job. Not all of them. But if he is indeed the head coach, as I think most people expect him to be, he'll be able to get a lot out of this team, I imagine. So that could be a sneaky pick for the playoffs, or I think more likely probably still on the outside. But they're getting... What aspects is Quenneville not good at? Which ones do you think? He's a trustworthy coach. He keeps secrets on. Touche. Columbus is in a weird spot. Fan base that deserves a lot more success than what they've been given. We'll see if Don Waddell can finally do it. But, I don't know. In a weird spot. Jury's definitely out on him. Dallas... Very busy today, and maybe some of the more controversial moves for Dallas. They kept Matt Duchene, 3 years, $1 million. Not bad, especially after Nashville, kicked him to the curb. Seems to have found a home there. Not bad. Casey DeSmith, his reputation precedes him, but $1 million for 3 years is a pretty damn good contract for him. Brendan Smith, $1 million 1 year is interesting. Matt Dumba, $375 for 2 years. Matt Dumba, the person, seems to be a tremendous human being. Matt Dumba, the hockey player, is not what he used to be. It's interesting for Dallas to take him on, to be like, well, let's see if he can recapture some of that old magic. That's a lot of money for a, hey, prove yourself that you can still be what you used to be type of contract. Lyubushkin, 2 years at $3.25. The guy blocks a hell of a lot of shots, but that's a lot. Nils Lundqvist, I mean, you better keep him around. You gave up a first-round pick for him. Capobianco, Lyndon Hughes, floaters between NHL and AHL. I know a lot of Stars fans are kind of like, oh boy, this was not a inspiring day, and that does seem to be the case. Like, obviously at forward, Maverick Bourque, Logan Stankoven, the younger guys are making an impact there. But their defense was what was spotty last year, and it's like, you've bought out Ryan Suter to bring in Matt Dumba and Ilya Lyubushkin. And Goulet in chat made my point for me. Thank you. If you're gonna bring in, now granted, Chris Tanev might not have want to stayed, but if you're going to spend that much money on Dumba and Lyubushkin, why not just pay the premium to convince Chris Tanev to stay? We obviously aren't privy to those negotiations, but the way it's shaken out, I don't know if there are any Stars fans who are like, okay, we lost Tanev and Suter, we brought in Dumba, Lyubushkin. We're better on defense. I know I wouldn't feel that way if I was a Stars fan. That's all I can say is speaking from my perspective. I wouldn't feel like the defense has gotten better. So, tough to lost Hakanpää as well. It's true. And you could argue Hakanpää might be a better version of Lyubushkin? Maybe? That's not exactly a fun conversation to have, but, So yeah, if I'm a Stars fan, I'm not very optimistic about how today has gone, to be honest. You know, you might be like, do they even have any, like, unless like Liam Bixel steps up and makes the team or something, like, you don't have too much going on, right? Not great. Detroit, they've been a little bit busy. William Lagesson, floater between the NHL and the AHL. Good player, though. $2.5 million to Cam Talbot for 2 years. $2 million to Eric Gustafsson for 2 years. Sheldon Dries, a bare minimum deal for Jack Campbell, and then Christian Fischer. And obviously, the night before, Patrick Kane for $4 million on a 1-year deal, which is a lot. You know, who knows for Patrick Kane? Is it about making money, winning more cups? Like, what's your goal here? Because taking that much money probably doesn't help Detroit get closer to winning a cup. But then again, you already have your rings. So are you content with just trying to make as much money as a team's willing to give you? I don't know. But the Red Wings are shaping up like this. There's no denying that top line should be good of DeBrincat, Larkin, and Raymond once Raymond is signed, which he currently isn't. Fabry comp for Kane. I mean, again, Kane was really good once he came back last year, and that was going to be it, right? It's either he's coming back from the surgery and he's going to be washed or he's going to get a career revival. It was the latter. They're still paying quite a bit of money to Compher and to Fabry. Fabry's good when he's healthy, but how often is he healthy? Obviously, Andrew Kopp making $5 million on the third line potentially is a bit scary. Like, you got some younger guys mixed into your bottom six, but still not the most convincing forward core in the world, right? Like, you could see that forward core maybe making the playoffs, but do you see them doing a ton of damage in the playoffs? I mean, who knows, but probably not. Ben Sherratt, they still have to sign Moritz Seider as well, by the way. But you still have a defense with Ben Sherratt, Jeff Petrie, like Edvinson's cracked the lineup. Only Matas and Gustafsson are good third pairing guys. But then the goaltenders, right? Not to mention on defense, Justin Hall's there making $3.4 million, and Cap Friendly doesn't even have him like factored in at the moment, which again is it's not anything major to look into. The goaltending situation: Ville Husso making almost $5 million, Cam Talbot at $2.5 million, Alex Lyon is signed, and Jack Campbell. Not to mention Sebastian Cossa and Carter Gylander, whatever it is. Again, you got rid of Jake Wallman. Goulet making points for me again. Thank you. You got rid of Jake Wallman at, 3.4 and gave up a second-round pick to do it, but then you signed Gustafsson for $2 million. Would it not have been worth keeping Wallman and like not signing Christian Fischer and Eric Gustafsson, even though Eric Gustafsson's really good? I mean, that's a really good contract for the guy. He's been one of the most underrated defensemen of his time. I don't know why. Again, if I'm a Red Wings fan right now that's kind of desperate to see that team make the playoffs again, are there positive aspects to the team? Yes. Are there still very concerning parts of the team? Yeah. Very, very much so. And I don't know how much today would have changed the outlook for Red Wings fans that were feeling pessimistic to begin with. And Eric Gustafsson's a good signing. Cam Talbot's a solid signing as long as he's not the guy, although you already had a Cam Talbot, at least by Cap Friendly's measurements, in the form of Ville Husso. It's weird. It's weird. That's all I can say for Detroit. It's weird. Edmonton. Obviously, they're going to name a fuckboy as their GM of the team very soon. They brought back Connor Brown for dirt cheap. He played really well in the playoffs. Still some injury concerns, though, which is why he didn't get term. Hamblin, Philp, Hoffenmeyer, yo-yo kind of players. Victor Arvidsson, 2 years, $4 million. Good deal. Good deal for Arvidsson. Josh Brown, he is your Vinny Desharnais replacement of just, we need big, big, large, huge on the blue line. We know they're not going to win the Stanley Cup because they brought back Corey Perry for 1 year at just over $1 million. Colin Delia, Connor Carrick, again, yo-yo between NHL and AHL. Jeff Skinner, 1 year, $3 million, and Matthias Janmark brought back with a bit of term after his great playoff performance. So looking at the Oilers, they are still in a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. Victor Arvidsson is a pretty damn good pickup, especially if he does slot in alongside Leon Draisaitl. He was injured last year, but he is a guy who can put up points. I mean, if he can put up 60 points in Nashville and score 30 goals, imagine if he is paired with Leon Draisaitl, what he'll be able to do. I expect that to be a really good signing for them. Jeff Skinner as well. I mean, if you pair him next to Draisaitl, not bad. And regardless of whether or not it's Arvidsson or Skinner, on that third line with a couple of the younger guys, that should provide you some depth scoring that you desperately lacked in the playoffs. The forward core looks better right now than it did for the team that played in the Stanley Cup Final. Defensively, Ekholm Bouchard was awesome. Nurse needs to prove he's not currently holding the worst contract in the league. They still have to sign Philip Broberg, Kulak and Ceci, hit or miss. Obviously, the big thing, they got rid of Jack Campbell. They bought out the contract. They're only paying $3.6 million for two goalies. Is Stuart Skinner the guy? Time will tell. This lineup, for my money, if I'm an Oilers fan, I do think they have absolutely improved the lineup. And all of a sudden, it's like, okay, they do have another kick at the can. The problem, again, is this. You have $3 million in dead cap this year, thanks to James Neal and Jack Campbell. It doesn't go down by much next year. While Neal comes off the books, Campbell's money goes up. And, of course, the big situations that we all know are impending. Evan Bouchard is due at the end of next year. That guy is getting no less than $8 million. No less. I mean, you could argue he's going to get paid more than Cale Makar because the cap has gone up. And Leon Draisaitl will be a UFA, leaving Connor McDavid with 1 year left. There were a lot of people who thought that, hey, maybe this year was their best shot. Looking at the roster, I think they have one more chance. They have one more chance next year. A legitimate shot, especially after the Arvidsson and Skinner signings for depth. But similar to Bruins fans when Pasta hadn't been re-signed yet, if Draisaitl isn't re-signed heading into the season, that is going to just be a dark cloud over Edmonton all season long. If he does not re-sign. And then, God forbid what happens if he doesn't actually re-sign in full. So again, they've done well today. But man, do they have the most pressure on them for any team in the league. And they're going to, again, the word is, going to be getting Stan Bowman, who is one of the most overrated general managers of his time, who, if you want to talk about Chicago's GM history, by the way, if you want to talk about the history of their general managers, there's a pretty good argument that a lot of Stan Bowman's success came directly from the team that Dale Talon built, which is pretty similar to Ken Holland. Actually, very similar to Ken Holland, because if you go, and I don't know if there'll be an extra space in here, let's find out. If you go to the history of the Detroit Red Wings general managers, all right, they do count Red Wings. It's Wikipedia, you never know. They do count it as one word. Really? Whatever. Fuck you, Wikipedia. If you go to the list of Detroit Red Wings general managers in their history, Ken Holland was viewed as a guy that directly took over and benefit from teams that Brian Murray and Scotty Bowman happened to build. You could argue Edmonton just traded in Ken Holland for the younger model, which is funny because the guy's 51 years old. So I am very intrigued by Edmonton. Very intrigued by Edmonton because it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. For the Florida Panthers, the defending Stanley Cup champions, the biggest news, obviously, the day before the deadline, or the day before free agency, re-signing Sam Reinhart, 8 years at under $9 million. It's tough to beat that for the best signing of this time frame. He would have gotten he could have gotten 10 million on the open market, man. He could have gotten 10 million on the open market. That is a player that clearly loved playing in Florida, felt like he found his home, and was willing to take a bit of a discount for the term to lock in there. And yes, the value is indeed very nice. That is a fucking stellar contract. Even if he's not a fucking 50-plus goal scorer again, that's a great deal. Tomáš Nosek, Rasmus Asplund, good signings for the bottom six at dirt cheap. AJ Greer, dare I say friend of the channel, AJ Greer, Bruins legend. Happy to see AJ get another opportunity at the NHL level. Dmitry Kulikov, also good signing. I mean, 4 years, dirt cheap. It's a good deal. I mean, again, someone that had been with Florida, came back, wins a cup. That's not bad. I'll text what's going on, by the way. I'm doing well. And then they signed Jesper Boqvist for dirt cheap, which is also a really good deal. Like, that's what you have to do, is sign the Boqvists, the Noseks, the Asplunds of the world for dirt cheap. In terms of what they have to do, Anton Lundell is an RFA. But if you look at that roster, you look at that top six, the bottom six, like, if Gadjevich and Greer both play next year, those two guys will drop the gloves with anybody in the league. So if you're worried as a Panthers fan about them, like, losing that grittiness a little bit, absolutely fucking not. They might be more gritty this year. Of course, there was word, too, about, like, are they shopping Aaron Ekblad? But it'd be interesting to see him move at this point, because he is, like, the staple of that defense, which isn't that bad. Like, it's not. Like, it's not, like, the most... You look at it, it's not the most, like, visually impressive defense in the world. The growers, not showers of the NHL defense corps, and that's because they have arguably the best coach in the league. And you don't need to have the most impressive-looking defensive core when you know how to use it. Not speaking from experience or anything. And, of course, Sergei Bobrovsky in goal. Spencer Knight, incredibly fucking expensive. We'll see if Spencer Knight can get back to the NHL level. And consistently stay there. Like, that's the expectation, obviously. Like, they gave him time. They had Stolarz. Stolarz is gone now, and you're getting paid $4.5 million. So, wishing nothing but the best to Spencer Knight, but he does have some pressure on him. And then Panthers fans wouldn't give a shit if Sergei Bobrovsky's cap hit was doubled. They'll love that man for life. And again, he's going to the Hockey Hall of Fame. Guaranteed now. So, the Florida Panthers, can they go back-to-back? 100% they can. Will they? I don't know. But they are no less scary than they were a week ago when they won the Cup. At least from my viewpoint. That's a scary team. That is a scary, scary team. The Los Angeles Kings have also been busy. They took Warren Fogle from Edmonton, 3 years at 3.5. It's a bit much, but it makes sense price-wise on the open market. You know, he was all right in the playoffs. It's a little bit much. Joel Edmondson getting 4 years and almost $4 million. I get that some people look at the Nikita Zadorov contract and go like, ooh, that's a little bit, isn't it? I will take that Zadorov contract any day of the week compared to Joel Edmondson. And yes, it's because I'm salty about 2019 still. But objectively, that's a good bit of money. It's a good bit of money. Phoenix Copley for dirt cheap, not bad. Trevor Lewis for dirt cheap, not bad. Jeff Malott, Tyler Madden, Jack Studnicka. I mean, again, a lot of young guys to help fill out and maybe, play. The LA Kings right now do still have to sign Quentin Byfield. They got to sign Jordan Spence. And Arthur Kaliev, we'll see what happens with him. They made the playoffs this past year. They got rid of Pierre-Luc Dubois. I mean, granted, you're going to feel the effects of not having him there, positive or negative. And, of course, the guys that you traded him to get rid of. But, some of these younger guys, like Laferriere, played basically the whole season. Turcotte finally started to get some NHL time. Not a huge impact, but you get Tanner Jeannot, and, yeah, you get Tanner Jeannot. You get Joel Edmondson. They've added some toughness. It's a weird team. It's a weird team. Especially, too, if your goaltending tandem is Darcy Kemper and David Rittich. Riddick was actually very stellar last year. But man, if you have to start relying on him more because Darcy Kemper can't refine his game, that's when it gets to be a bit of a problem. It could be a good season. Again, they're one of those teams that are in the middle, even though they made the playoffs last year. It could be a good season for them, or they could take a pretty big step back in the aftermath of having to deal with getting rid of Pierre-Luc Dubois. Brant Clark could make that defense, but you don't know how big of an impact he'll have, but it is Brant Clark, so never say never. But yeah, if I'm a Kings fan, I'm not panicking. Oh my God, they've botched this offseason. But you are paying $6 million to Tanner Jeannot and Joel Edmondson. That is in and of itself a little bit concerning. It's also hot here. I'm going to keep chugging water. Don't mind me. The Minnesota Wild. I don't have too much else to add about LA. Minnesota. Yakov Trenin got paid $3.5 for 4 years. That sums it up pretty well. He's a good third liner, but that's a bit much. He's a UFA type of signing. It's a bit much for a guy with a career high of 24 points. But he's not the smallest lad. This is my hydrate routine. Delicious. So that's a bit concerning. Travis Boyd, type of yo-yo player. Jake Middleton gets paid. He's been good. Maybe a little bit much, but it's good. Ciccone, Crotty, Cameron Gauts. Just a lot of depth, right? Now, obviously, for Minnesota, they are still very much dealing with the effects of the Parise and Suter buyouts. This is the last year before they get an insane amount of relief. So you're having to deal with that situation. They still got to sign Declan Chisholm, which isn't that bad. It's just interesting that, Yakov Trenin's the guy you're going to give that money to. Really? You picked up Jacob Lauko, which is fine. He probably wasn't going to crack the Bruins. In theory, it's a team that can absolutely push for a playoff spot, especially with the emergence of Brock Faber last year was insane. Last year of Marc-Andre Fleury, they need Philip Gustafsson to bounce back. It's still a roster that's very much being affected by those buyouts, but the problem is, even once those buyouts are off the books, look whose contract is up next year. You immediately got to reinvest a good amount of that money into Brock Faber. Marat Kuznetsov will be an RFA. Marco Rossi is going to be an RFA. So it's a very interesting time for Minnesota where you can kind of forgive them for not being a playoff team, even though, that's a self-inflicted wound right there. But at the same time, it's just an interesting roster. Are they willing to do the best? Sure. Teams willing to pay for toughness and grit, contributing Florida's success to having pessimists. There's no denying the Florida Panthers have affected the league. I made the comparison earlier of Vancouver trying to mirror Boston after the 2011 final. There's always a bit of that. Whatever team wins the cup, what style did they play? Let's try to replicate that a little bit. Instead of just being here's the project, here's the vision, this is what we're doing. So, which is what Bill Zito did with Florida. So, go figure. Not a disaster for Minnesota, but again, they're in who knows territory. I know people have been waiting for this one. Montreal. Now, no specific comments about the draft. I get Demidov. A lot of people are excited about the draft. You guys should know my opinion at this point. Talk to me in 5 years. Players that look like they're going to be good can be shit. Players that look like they're going to be shit can be good. Teams that fucked up the draft actually did really well in the draft, and vice versa. It happens every single year. I will not say that a team should not be excited about how they did, or Habs fans specifically shouldn't be excited about that. But when you look at the draft now, 5 years ago, Jack Hughes going first overall, we talked about this on draft night. Capo Caco, good player, Not what the Rangers thought they were getting at 2. Kirby Dach's had injury troubles. Bowen Byram is no longer with the Avs. Turcotte's just now cracking the Kings lineup. Moritz Seider was viewed very questionably when he was drafted. Red Wings were right. The entire 2019 draft is up on YouTube. Go back and watch that broadcast and see what they say about certain guys and see how well it's aged. That's how the draft works, right? You can have great picks, bad picks. That is what it is, right? That's just the fact. That goes with anybody here. Cole Caulfield. There were a lot of people where it's like, how'd he fall to 15? And there were some people being like, I thought he might fall further. Habs were right to take that guy at 15, you know? But then you have Lassie Thompson for the Senators. Trust me, on that broadcast, good things about Lassie Thompson. He's not in the NHL anymore. He's gone back over to, I think he went to Sweden, not Finland, but still. So, you just never know. And then, of course, you look at the Stanley Cup champions and Sam Bennett, someone who goes top 5. Oh, high skill? No, he's a pest. He was a middle 6 pest, which worked out perfectly for him. So in terms of these contracts, of course, they had to sign Quebecois. They signed Slavkovsky to the big deal. There are a lot of people who are looking at this. 8 years, $7.6 million. A lot of people looking at this is like, oh, that's a risk. It's a good risk to take. You know, I still think the best example of the past decade has to be Nathan MacKinnon. Not saying Slavkovsky is going to be Nathan MacKinnon. But if you look at his contract history, after his ELC, Sakic signed him to a 7-year deal at $6.3 million, and a lot of people were going, ew, that's a lot of money. 2016-17, he had a 52-point season, but that was a lot of money at the time. And even then, the first year of the deal, 53 points, he grew into it, to say the least. He grew into it. The Draisaitl contract was very similar as well. So, again, it's a deal that could age horribly, but it's the right bet for the Habs. And in terms of what they have coming up, again, they're going to have an extra first-round pick thanks to Calgary. The only guy to sign now is Arbor Xhekaj, who won't be that expensive. There's no reason to not be optimistic if you're a Habs fan. Kent Hughes has done a phenomenal job at GM. Marty St. Louis has done a phenomenal job as the coach. They still have some pieces that aren't going to be core guys. The important players like Gallagher and Anderson that you really can't get rid of. But the younger guys are making more and more of an impression as the seasons go on. And now it's just a matter of, that top line. Suzuki, Caulfield, Slavkovsky. They got Newhook, of course, and Kirby Dach. Can he stay healthy? That's the big question, is how well can these young guys develop? And obviously they're extremely young on defense as well, outside of Savard and Matheson. Montembeault looked okay last year. They're still a ways away, right? I think most people, and shout out to Altex for the
here comes a pizza, see it?
5 months on the primer. Appreciate you. I think Columbus will be signing Nylander anyway.
Now with the Patriots,
probably, yeah. I mean, that's what a lot of teams do, is they don't want to sign someone at the term that the qualifying offer would be, but they still bring him in anyway. I think expecting playoffs if you're a Habs fan, maybe not this upcoming year. I think this is kind of similar to Chicago, right? Enjoy what this year is going to be. Enjoy the younger players that are going to make an impact. If you make the playoffs, cool. But honestly, it might not even be the best thing for them to make the playoffs. If you get a top 5 pick or whatever because of Calgary, and then a pick between 8 and 15 or whatever, you're laughing to the bank. You're laughing to the bank, especially after drafting Demidov. If he pans out, there's all the reason in the world right now to be optimistic about the Habs. Especially because they have not signed a Gallagher or Anderson-like deal so far this offseason. Smart. Try not to give out any of those contracts. Be smart with the money as they've been so far. Good things could happen, right? And again, they don't even have the Slavkovsky cap hit factored in until next year because of the extensions. So they're doing great. They're doing great. That's just the only way to say it. They are doing phenomenal. I mean, even if it's a late first-round pick, it's still doing great. Well, current roster appears to be tanking. We'll get to them in a second because it is San Jose. So Montreal, so far so good. Habs fans should be very optimistic. The team that was going to be the story of the day before the NHL tried to do their shady bullshit. No, I'm not going to let it go because it is the biggest story in hockey. The Nashville Predators. We knew they had a shitload of money. They've spent it. 5 years, 5.5 for 33-year-old Jonathan Marchessault. 4 years, $8 million for 34-year-old Steven Stamkos. $7 million, 7 by 7 for 30-year-old Brady Shea. Really, thank you for the sub, by the way. Scott Wedgwood on a very good deal. Alex Carrier on a very good deal, 3 for under 4. UC Saros, the 8-year extension at under $8 million, also a great deal. And then depth, Hinostroza, Lacini, Blankenberg, and the other Matt Murray. Let's talk about this real quick. This is a potential home run swing by Barry Trotz, is what this is. Obviously, they have some extra picks, primarily courtesy of the Tampa Bay Lightning to work with. Henrique, hello. How are you? Colin Cap-Friendly goes down in a couple of days. So, with Nashville here, their work's already done in terms of signings. Their cap space is basically gone. There'll have to be some roster maneuverability. But this is what it's shaping up like. You have to think back to when Barry Trotz took over this team and getting Matt Duchene out of there, getting Ryan Johansson out of there. Those two players in particular were viewed as guys who weren't great locker room leaders, even though they were supposed to be. Whether or not that's true or not, who knows, but that was the word. Now, of course, last year they brought in Ryan O'Reilly. Now they've brought in Jonathan Marchessault with the Stanley Cup pedigree. They've brought in Steven Stamkos with the Stanley Cup pedigree. It is an old team, for sure. You know, like even Roman Yossi's 34 years old at this point. But there's no denying that they're better. You know, if you add a Stamkos and a Marchessault to that top 6, it's better. And that is a team that is going to try to make the most out of the next couple of years before having some more down years. You know, they have a couple of prospects that have made it into the lineup and stuff like that. But this is a team that's saying, Roman Yossi's 34 years old. We want to make the most of having a point per game defender on this team. Let's try to do that. That's what this is. This is Barry Trotz trying to put together a team that can compete. And it's tough to look at this roster with the still very respectable and solid defense that they have, with one of the best goaltenders in the world between the pipes, and adding what they've added into that top 6. Nashville's officially in that territory of it's kind of a disaster if you don't make the playoffs. Now, obviously, you know, Jonathan Marchessault being allowed to just go by Vegas. It's typical Vegas. They treat it like a business. They don't give a shit about sentimentality. The Stamkos thing for Tampa, it's a rough day for Tampa Bay Lightning fans because it's just like, if you're going to go for Gensel, why not just keep Stamkos, right? It's going to be very weird to see him in a drastically different color. It's not a bad fit for him. I think, you know, there's some people saying, like, oh, we could have gone here or whatever. I mean, it's an $8 million contract for 4 years. I mean, that's pretty much as good as Stammer was going to do at this point. So the big question now is, what did they do with Askarov in goal, especially because they signed Wedgwood for a couple of years. So more than likely you could see Askarov get dealt. There is still room to improve that team. Maybe they'll wait. Maybe they won't. Time will tell. But solely from the Nashville perspective and not super in-depth with the Tampa thing with Stamkos, it's a damn good day for Nashville. Again, they're going for it. They view it as, we have Forsberg, we have O'Reilly, we have Saros, we have Josi. Insulate with the best talent we can get. To hell with how the contracts are going to age. the next 2 to 3 years, we're making an honest run at it. I think that's a respectable way to look at it. It's just whether or not it works out for them, right? So it's a positive time for Nashville because you know what the intention is. The intention is to win. New Jersey. They haven't done too much in terms of numbers, but they have made some good signings. Brett Pesce, 6 years at 5.5. Brendan Dillon, 3 years at $4 million. And they also brought in Stefan Nason, 3 years at 2 3/4. And then Colton White and Mike Hardman for depth. They have obviously been very busy in the trade market, and this team looks very different. They do still have to sign Nolan Foote and Dawson Mercer. That shouldn't be too expensive. In terms of that presumed depth chart, again, it's a team that where last year it was a disaster that you didn't make the playoffs. It's kind of similar to where the Bruins were a decade ago, where it's like, oh shit, we really shouldn't make it. But did you make the most of it in the draft? Can you regroup and get back? And the Devils are very likely to be a team that can get back. That top 6 is still very strong. I get it was weird to be like Paul Cotter, but again, Paul Cotter's a very solid 4th line option. And with Alex Holtz, he wasn't going to break into that top 6. And if Alex Holtz isn't breaking into that top 6, Alex Holtz isn't worth much. So it's just one of those things where it's like, all right, well, that's the move to make. I mean, you could argue like having Palat on the 3rd line and giving Holtz that chance would work. But at the same time, it's a pretty well-built forward core. The defense has undergone some changes, man. Siegenthaler, and then hopefully a healthy Dougie Hamilton. That's a great pairing if that is indeed going to be the pairing. Luke Hughes will get his 2nd season under his belt. Pesce is a good add as a defensive defenseman. And then Brendan Dillon as well. Defensive defenseman, big guy. Again, we've seen the emphasis teams have taken on size and stuff like that. Nemec obviously going to be looking to break in a little bit. The most important thing for them is, in theory, they should have stable goaltending between Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen. In theory. If this doesn't work out, then Jesus, what the hell do they do? But it's very experienced and, in theory, reliable goaltending, and that is what they needed the most. That defense looks great. I agree if you had somebody that could push Andre Palat down to the 3rd line, that would be nice. Maybe they find that eventually in a different trade. I don't know if you're going to find it, with free agent signings right now, because in terms of who is left, the answer is not many people, right? I mean, unless you can convince Joe Pavelski not to retire, and shout out to Highland for the 9 months, by the way. Welcome back. Unless you can convince Joe Pavelski to not retire and go to New Jersey, someone like Tarasenko is your best bet. And honestly, I'd kind of agree. If you can get Vladimir Tarasenko to push Palat down to the 3rd line, they're looking that much better. Who knows where Tarasenko will go, though. But he's kind of your best bet. I mean, I don't think you want to try to bank on like a Mike Hoffman to recapture form from 10 years ago. So, not bad for New Jersey. They've done what they've had to do. That defense is rock solid. The goaltending should be much better. We'll see how it ages, though, right? You never know. That's the whole point. The New York Islanders, Lou Lamoriello woke up late, as he always does. They kept Mike Riley. Analytical gem, Mike Riley. Again, he's good. And he signed for dirt cheap. Anthony Duclair, 3.5 for 4 years. Good for Anthony Duclair. A bit of an odd fit for the Islanders. But it's in theory, though, it's a speed threat, right? Like, unless my opinion of Duclair is wrong, like, he hasn't lost the speed element to his game. You obviously have guys like Matt Barzal that can really fly. We know that any Lou Lamoriello team is going to be, like, defensively based, physical. They needed some extra skill. Duclair can do that. I mean, again, he had 24 goals last year, so I actually don't mind that signing. It's just kind of surprising that Lou did it. It's a team that should be in the playoffs next year, or at least very much competing for the playoffs, and just missing out because that defense is really solid for the most part. I mean, there's some questions about like Sam Bolduc, and I don't think Pelech and Pulock are what they used to be, but the emergence of Noah Dobson helps shake that off a bit, and they still have one of the best goalies in the world, and if not the best goalie tandem Sorokin wasn't great in the playoffs, but that is what it is. That's a playoff caliber roster. Now, this is a team that can compete with like the Florida Panthers of the world to win a cup. Probably not, but you never say never. They're not in a bad spot. You know, they didn't get the big flashy signing. Like Duclair is not a flashy signing when the likes of Steven Stamkos happen to be out there, but I don't think they're in a terrible spot. Just my viewpoint. The New York Rangers, who still have Jacob Trouba for the moment, unless they trade him or send him away like they did Barclay Goodrow. Their only signing today is Sam Carrick, which is a good fourth liner. RFA is to deal with Ryan Lindgren, Braden Schneider. Those won't be the cheapest deals on earth. Of course, their big problem is Igor Shesterkin's on the last year of his deal. And after that, the word is they are starting their asking price for his next contract at double what he's getting paid now. That's bad for the Rangers, at least, unless they can, of course, shed the Trouba salary, which they need to anyway. I mentioned the Edmonton Oilers having a ton of pressure on them. The Rangers have a ton of pressure on them as well. You know, just in terms of you've put this team together to win a cup, like you got close, but not all that close. I mean, relatively, like did it ever really look like Florida was going to lose that series? It's still a really good team that will be considered a cup contender, but again, they have a lot of pressure on them and have some deals that they still need to solve, and in other deals coming up that how are you going to handle those contracts, you know? But like Riley Smith in a trade was a good pickup, adds to that forward group there. So they're not in a bad spot, but another team where it's like, okay, what the hell is our cap situation going to look like in a year or two? People love dunking on the Ottawa Senators. I know why. Noah Gregor for dirt cheap 1 year. Mike Amadio, Stanley Cup champion Mike Amadio, but $2.6 million for 3 years. And 2 years, $4 million for David Perron. When you still have to sign RFA Shane Pinto. You know, I don't know about the Sens. I feel like, you remember when we talked earlier about teams, like Anaheim hasn't done anything. When you talk about teams that almost try to grow too fast, it feels like this is a team that might try to have grown too fast. And I know that Shane Pinto has asked for a trade. It doesn't mean he's going to get it. Jake DeBrusk once asked for a trade from the Bruins. I think he asked twice. He never got traded. So that's one of those things. Someone can request a trade. It doesn't mean they're going to go anywhere. And even then, if you lose Shane Pinto, the team looks even more questionable than it already is. Like, you have injury concerns about Josh Norris, who looked good, signed the new deal, immediately gets hurt. They're a team I think that you could really see kind of getting stuck in no man's land a little bit, right? I think so. Didn't Pinto, because of the gambling thing, get that? Yes, I believe so. You know, you look at their defense, Anderson, Zub, Shabbat, Jensen, after getting rid of Chikrin. Like, Bernard Dockers kind of made an impact. They do the big trade for Linus Ullmark. And I know that people, you know, were happy about that return. Again, as a Bruins fan, I don't hate the return for Linus Ullmark. I really don't. You know, we'll see how it ages, of course, with Dean Letourneau being a part of the return in that situation. But I feel like the pressure's kind of on the Sens to make the playoffs. But, man, I don't know if they have the roster to do it. There's just some guys making more money than you'd expect. I don't know. I don't know what to make of Ottawa. They could be a playoff team. They could not. That's easy to say about any team, but it's weird. It's a very oddly constructed roster that I just genuinely don't know what to make of. So if there are Sens fans that are optimistic, cool. I don't blame you. I mean, you got Ullmark, and that's sweet, but I don't know. I just don't know what to make of this team. Like, I don't look at them and say, yep, that's absolutely a playoff team, when you know that the Atlantic Division is still going to have a very tough Toronto, Boston, and Florida team at the very least. It's tough to discount Tampa as well after getting Gensel. I know they got rid of Sergachev, and we'll talk about that in a second, but I don't know. I just feel like they're in the same spot of like, yeah, we should make the playoffs, but man, there's a good chance that you won't. Next up, Philadelphia. Eric Johnson, 1 year, $1 million. Garnet Hathaway, 2 years, 2.4. The big signing isn't a free agent signing at all. It's Matvey coming over, which is huge for them. Again, everyone's like, oh, Russian factor. It ended up not being a factor. Only RFA right now is Yegor Zamula. Of course, they are done with Carter Hart. There's a lot of question marks about this team. Like, they have first-round picks in this upcoming draft, which is nice. There's a lot of talk about how expensive of an extension Travis Konechny will see because his deal's up at the end of the year. He'll be a UFA. Again, it's a roster where it's like, could it be a playoff team? Yeah, potentially. But the competition level's pretty strong. And you can look at this roster and say, like, okay, they need some younger pieces to do really well. Will they? You know, Sam Urson, not great for the Flyers last year. Fedotov struggled when he finally came over. Obviously, now he'll have a full, proper offseason and preseason to train up. There's a lot that needs to go right, I would say, for the Flyers to be in a playoff spot. But it could. The roster's in a better spot than it was. We also don't want to put too much pressure on Matvey Michkov immediately, which they're going to. The expectations are sky high, but that is a lot of pressure for him to immediately step into this lineup and be like, oh, well, he had 41 points in 47 games in the KHL. He'll be fine at the NHL level. I hope so. It's not a guarantee, though. Especially, you got to factor it in on a John Tortorella coach team. We'll see. A lot of question marks for the Flyers, but they're going to be an interesting team to watch. I think they could be in that category of, hey, if we make the playoffs, cool, but if not, just enjoy the younger players that are still making those strides forward and know that the future looks a little bit brighter than it used to. Oh, Pittsburgh. How's Michkov's contract? $13 million total. Bonuses. Let me see if I can. I don't know if they've reported what they happen to be. Yeah, so he's got $3.5 million worth of potential performance bonuses in each year. So, and that'll be based on games played, goals, points, whatever they decree. But yeah, his cap hit's still only the $950. Pittsburgh's a weird team, man. They've been a weird team for a while. Kyle Dubas at the helm now, obviously. They brought in Matt Grzelcyk 1 year, 2 3/4. It's an all right contract for Grzelcyk. He was definitely done in Boston, though. Beauvillier for pretty cheap isn't terrible. And then guys that might bounce around between the two leagues, Hollowell, Ryan Shea, Boko Amama, Klerman, Bemstrom, and then Blake Lizotte, 2 years, just under $2 million. They have pretty much said, like, they're trying to do what Nashville is clearly doing now, where it's just we have to go for it and give it our best shot until Crosby's absolutely done and Malkin's absolutely done. Letang, you get it. I think most people would agree Nashville's in a better spot to accomplish that goal than Pittsburgh is. Yes, Pittsburgh gets Kevin Hayes. They get paid to get him. I don't know if he'll be fourth liner. I'd be surprised. Like, the forward core itself isn't inherently trash, but it also isn't the most, like, awe-inspiring. And, yeah, Crosby's deal is up at the end of the year, and that's another thing that could kind of loom overhead for the Penguins all season long is he staying? There's a chance he doesn't. There is a chance in a scenario where he could say, I want to win one more cup, or I want to make more money than you can pay me. I'm out. He's Sidney Crosby. He can go wherever the hell he wants. Will he stay in Pittsburgh? That defense in theory, should work. I mean, that top four, if these four are playing to their best, that's not awful. It's really not. Grzelcyk, and whether or not it's Jack St. Ivany or somebody else, who knows? Jari, Nedeljkovic, not the most confidence-inspiring goaltenders out there either. Like, they still, need to see better performance from a lot of guys. It feels like it's the make or break season for Pittsburgh, right? It's either this is the year that the wheels back on track, you make the playoffs again, good to go, or this is the year that the wheels fall off. Maybe Crosby leaves, maybe he doesn't, but maybe it's just clear that Malkin's regressed too much, Letang's regressing too much, and it's just the goaltending isn't it, and it's just not it. And there's no more kicks at the can. GG's, game over, time to rebuild. I know I'd be a bit more pessimistic about the Penguins than optimistic if I was a fan of the team. The San Jose Sharks. The Sharks. Tyler Toffoli, 4 years, $6 million. That's a cap whale. Alex Wenberg, 5 years, $2 million. That's a cap whale. And that's the theme for the Sharks. This team is very much still tanking, but they needed some veteran players that will, A, take up cap space for now, and B, you'll be able to move at a future deadline for something. Don't know what, but you will eventually be able to move them, even Wenberg. The Sharks are absolutely still tanking. On paper at the draft, they did well. Again, doesn't mean shit for now. But the big focus, it's the young guys. It's William Eklund, it's Macklin Celebrini, whoever else might make the team. This is going to still be one of the worst teams in the league, right? Like right now, they are in that spot, kind of like I mentioned with Chicago, but obviously Chicago's further ahead. But San Jose is very much still in that position of, let's watch the young guys develop. Let's see what guys might be able to rehab their careers here that potentially either, like a Ty Dellandrea. Maybe Ty Dellandrea finds his form here and stays, and then, we have a piece. Or he finds his form and, we have a trade piece. That's what Sharks fans are looking at right now. For any of those guys kind of in their mid to early 20s, even late 20s potentially. That's where they are right now. They are still going to be bad. But if you do have like a Macklin Celebrini to play, or Tyler Toffoli to play along Macklin Celebrini, that gives you options, right? You're not like, all right, Mikael Granlund, carry Mac. Although Granlund was solid last year, underratedly so, but you get the point. So it's not a bad time to be a Sharks fan because at least there's a clear-cut direction with the team, right? And we've already talked about some teams that don't really have a direction. I don't know if Seattle's one of those teams that don't necessarily have a direction. I don't know what to make of them. Brandon Montour, Stanley Cup champion, 7x7. He got paid. Chandler Stevenson, Stanley Cup champion with Vegas, 7x6.25. Not bad. Will the Ducks be better this year? I talked about them at the start. Probably, but who knows by how much, basically. Because we don't know if like John Gibson's still going to be there or not. Chandler Stevenson, he got paid. They brought in Ben Myers, Mitch Stevens, Brandon Bureau, a bunch of depth. The big moves are Montour and Stevenson. People have wondered since day one what the Kraken were going to try to be. And it's like, they're going to be a slow builder. They made the playoffs. They didn't make the I still don't really know what to make of the Seattle Kraken, right? They do have to sign Matty Beniers and Ellie Tolvanen. Yes, Beniers already needs his first contract, his first big contract. A center core of Beniers, Stevenson, Gord, and then if Shane Wright makes the team, you could move Stevenson or Gord over to the wing. It's not bad. It's really not that bad. Obviously, you want to say like, certain overpayment, stuff like that. Like, this team should probably be a playoff team next year. I don't think that defense is bad at all. I mean, you got Vince Dunn locked up already, Montour now. Vince, I agree. Like, on paper, I mean, okay, can Joey Decora do it again in goal? Can Grubauer figure his shit out? It's not a bad team. Like, that is a playoff caliber team on paper. On paper doesn't mean a goddamn thing. But I think for Seattle, you know, you have a new head coach in Dan Bylsma, which is really weird to think about. Like, that feels like forever ago on May 28th that he was hired. That should be a playoff team, and it's going to be disappointing if they're not, I think is the right way to view it at the moment. St. Louis have done absolutely fuck all today. They re-signed Kasperi Kapanen 1 year, $1 million, and that's fine. But they still have to sign Nikita Alexandrov, which isn't huge. And then the Pavel Buchnevich thing, will his deal be up next year, is still there. But outside of getting rid of Kevin Hayes, it's like, what the hell did you get rid of Kevin Hayes for? You're going to bring back Tarasenko? Like, you got rid of Kevin Hayes, but you didn't exactly weaponize the cap space today. I mean, I guess they still could, but again, we went over the list of, like, big-name players that are still out there, and there's not many. You know, I mean, based solely off of point totals, Pavelski, Henrique, like, Tarasenko's probably the best guy there. Right? Out of the guys that are left, like, who are you looking at aside from, like, potential reunions? Shattenkirk? Like, I don't get it. I don't get it. I mean, I guess unless they're just like, well, this year, clear out cap space and then whatever. And yeah, that's the only move they could make, right? Is it's like, okay, are you the team that's in on a Martin Necas or somebody like that? Which would make sense, but for right now, the picture's just very muddied and unclear because they have the cap space, but they haven't done anything with it yet. You know, they got good goaltending last year, so in theory, that should be okay as long as Jordan Binnington doesn't get himself suspended by being an idiot. Shout out to Alex, speaking of the Blues, for the 55 months. Alex, thank you for the primer. Alex, I know you're a Blues fan, obviously. How are you feeling about the Blues? Because they haven't done anything today outside of keeping Kapanen. This roster wasn't good enough to make the playoffs last year. In theory, it's not the worst roster in the league. Like, as a Blues fan, are you like, okay, bring back Tarasenko and I'm happy? Like, what are they? I don't know. That's another one of those teams where I'm just like, what are you? Like, clearly you're wanting to be towards the playoffs, but you're not making the big move to do it. And you've kind of, you know, hamstrung yourself a little bit by having three defensemen making $6.5 million each. It's just a weird team. It's a weird team. And you're also a Blues fan. I'm fine with doing nothing. Hey, maybe they land Leon Draisaitl in free agency next year and they laugh themselves to another Stanley Cup. Who knows? Could happen. The Tampa Bay Lightning obviously have done the vast majority of their business elsewhere.
Oh, we're doing this again.
Shout out to K-Town. K-Town, welcome back. 3 years, nearly league min for Zemgus Girgensons. Jesse Ylönen is also on the move. Obviously, the big deal, the trade of Mikhail Sergachev, the acquisition and re-signing of Jake Gensel for 7 years at $9 million, and not bringing back Steven Stamkos. They have about $6 million left in space. They have to sign J.J. Moser, but that's it. Obviously, Hedman's deal is up at the end of this next year. Brisebois moving some pieces around, and obviously time will tell how well it works out. But you can look at this team and say, and for the Blues, I don't feel great about them, but I don't feel awful about them. Okay, I feel like I was on point there. Just like, I don't know what you are. We'll see. The Lightning have a team that you could be like, all right, bottom six. But they have a roster where you're like, yeah, they're probably a playoff team. It would be a disaster if they're not. The biggest issue is Jake Gensel has to have the best season of his career. Because even though this roster looks solid, the negative impact of not having Steven Stamkos come back is going to hurt. They got worse. I don't think they got worse. I don't think they necessarily got worse. Gensel Stamkos, okay, argue what you want. I get losing Sergachev, but at the same time, there's certain arguments, certain, things you can look at with Sergachev where was he overpaid a bit? That's a part of the conversation. Not to mention, JJ Moser is better than he looks because he's been on the goddamn Coyotes. If you want to say they got worse, sure. I don't think it's by a significant amount if they have. If they don't make the playoffs, it's a disaster. But again, the biggest thing for them is you have to shrug off the negative sentiment of the fan base for not bringing back your captain. And that's very difficult to overcome. Very difficult to overcome. It puts so much expectation on Jake Gensel. His career high in points is 84 with Pittsburgh. He better be over a point per game again. He better score 40 goals again. That is absolutely the expectation. You look at Stamkos from last year, 81 points, he scored 40 goals. It's a bold strategy to let Steven Stamkos go and to try and replace him with Jake Gensel. I think they're very similar players. Gensel's obviously 5 years younger. Similar in terms of what they're able to do point production wise. And of course in terms of goals, we just saw it, the 40 goals and whatnot. I gotta be honest, if I'm a Lightning fan, I'm disappointed too. I'm disappointed, I'm not happy. I'm concerned about the team. It could work out, though. It could work out. Like I said, I view the loss of Stamkos as a much bigger loss than the loss of Sergachev, though. Just my take. From an outside perspective. What else? Not too many left. Ross starting today? Probably not, man. I don't have the heart for it this year. Plus, I'd just be editing Vasi's roster, basically. The Toronto Maple Leafs. Sergachev still a legit top pairing defenseman. We can have a Sergachev conversation. We can. Shout out to Cody, by the way. You can suggest whatever you want, but given I'm not going to be home for the next 3 days, that suggestion might not matter. So, take that as you will. Now, again, there are different metrics, different things to look at. There's eye test and everything in between, right? But when we are talking about Mikhail Sergachev, obviously had the big injury this last year. Wasn't particularly great. He didn't have a phenomenal season last year. I don't think that's controversial to say. Right? Even at a base level, when it comes to the injuries, and obviously you can go down to his fucking possession metrics, whatever the hell you want to look at, I'm pretty sure it's fair to say he wasn't great and hasn't particularly been the kind of guy, the potential Hedman replacement that a lot of people thought he could have been in the first couple of years that he first got there. Right? I don't think that's the craziest thing to say. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. And even if it comes down to something, and again, shout out to someone like Jay Fresh, right? These cards aren't the end all be all. Solid. Definitely had a down year last year. The injury had a lot to do with it. But you even look at the year before last, there's questions. There's questions about whether or not Mikhail Sergachev was actually going to be that legitimate number one guy to take the mantle from Victor Hedman and be worth an $8.5 million contract. For Utah, makes all the sense in the world. You need that big splash of, hey, look at what we're doing. I'm just saying, for Tampa, we'll see if they're proven right as to, hey, this was the right time to move on from this guy. So, Edmonds a Hall of Famer. That's I'm not even saying he has to play at a Hall of Fame level. to replace Hedman, but to be the number one defender on that team, like out of the list of defenders that are there, he would have been, but that doesn't mean that he is who you ideally want as a number one defenseman on that team, right? You look at number one defenseman on teams. You know, we don't know if Charlie McAvoy is going to be a Hall of Famer. He's the number one defenseman on the Bruins. Is Mikhail Sergachev a Charlie McAvoy? Is he an Adam Fox? Is he I won't say Cale Makar, because Cale Makar is going to be a goddamn Hall of Famer. Like I said, I just think the Stamkos departure hurts a hell of a lot worse than the Sergachev departure. That's all. So, it is fair to say, like, okay, I'm not, you know, I'm trying to view things a bit more positively. Their defense is worse without him. I just don't know how much worse it is how I should have phrased things, right? Because I'm very intrigued at how good J.J. Moser can be on that team. And maybe I'm doing different style of players, but I mean, I think J.J. Moser has the potential to not only put up points, but have that more like well-rounded game that they were looking at Sergachev for. Different systems. We'll see, right? We'll see. The Toronto Maple Leafs have done things. Re-signing Timothy Liljegren, 2 years, $3 million. That's a little bit of money. Max Domi, 4 years, just under $4 million. That's a little bit of money. Joseph Wall, 3 years at nearly 3.7 that kicks in after this season. That's a bit of money. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, 4 years, $3.5 million. That's the cup tax. Okay. Matt Murray, dirt cheap for a year. Anthony Stolarz, 2 years, 2.5. Chris Tanev, 6 years, 4.5. That's the only way you were getting that cap hit down. And then Yanni Hakanpää, 2 years at 1.5. Not great from a cap perspective at the moment. They still have to sign Connor Dewar, and Nick Robertson has requested a trade. Doesn't mean he'll get it, but he has requested a trade. Are Leafs fans that optimistic right now? Should they be? Like goaltending, a lot of faith in Joseph Wall. I heard SDP's reaction to this, and it is if Joseph Wall is as good as they think he could be, if they waited to re-sign him, he would cost more than this, right? So that's the positive. If Joseph Wall is as good as people think he can be, and he stays healthy, this contract extension is going to look very good. If he's not good this year, if he can't stay healthy, oh boy, does that look bad. Anthony Stolarz just won a cup with Florida. He's been pretty solid for them. Reliable backup behind Wall. That's not bad. Obviously, 2.5. It is what it is. But even then, Wall and Stolarz, if they're both playing at their best level, that's not bad. They keep Matt Murray around as a third goalie, which I don't hate because that brings some stability to what you're doing with Aksimov and Hildeby in the AHL. And not having to rely on one of these guys in an injury situation. You can just say, minors, you're going to be there all year. We're going to develop you. But yeah, Matt Murray has signed a contract extension today. So he is still a Toronto Maple Leaf. He is their third goalie. Defensively, I also agree with Steve Dangle's take. Chris Tanev is the best right-handed shot the Leafs have had on that roster in God knows how long. Oliver Ekman-Larsson making 3.5. If you told a Leafs fan a year ago he was going to get that contract, you would go, oh my fucking God. And I don't know if too many fans don't feel that way just because he happened to win a cup with Florida. Like he played, according to Cap Friendly at least, he played really fucking well in that role. Better than I would have thought. 32 points in 80 games, but again, he is on the Florida Panthers. And again, Jay Fresh cards aren't the end-all, be-all. Support someone like Jay Fresh on Patreon, as I have for years, but just to show this card as well, again, I won't show too many because it is behind a paywall. That is the last 3 years of Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Now making 3.5 for 4 years in Toronto. I don't think I could be optimistic about that contract, right? Like, that screams John Klingberg 2.0. That screams John Klingberg 2.0 to me. And that would scare the crap out of me as a Leafs fan. It would. It absolutely would. Then Liljegren at $3 million. And again, this will be the last one that I show. It'll just be the 3. Again, support JFresh on Patreon. Liljegren's been very solid. He's not a power play specialist like OEL is, but it's not bad. You can't say it's just $3.5 million, though. You cannot say it's just $3.5 million with the Toronto Maple Leafs. $3.5 million to this team is the equivalent of $6 million to other teams because of their cap situation. You know, $25 million on their defense, not the end-all, be-all, but is that a bit more than is probably comfortable for Oliver Ekman-Larsson? Yeah. Tanev, I mean, we all know what that is. That he's going to be Robidas Islanded. Like, I agree their defense is better, but how well does it stack up to teams within the division, within the conference? I don't know. And we especially don't know what this defense is going to look like because they have a new coach who has entirely different systems. So the best way to sum up the Maple Leafs defense right now is a giant-ass question mark. I think that's fair. I'm an Oilers fan. We're paying Ceci. I'm living with that. I mean, that's fair, but I'd rather have Cody Ceci than Oliver Ekman-Larsson right now. Said what I said. Said what I said. And then, of course, the forwards. All the money in the world to the top 4. Final year for Tavares. Final year for Marner. We still don't know if that man is getting traded or not. They keep Max Domi around. You're still paying more for David Kampf than you probably should want to. You still got Ryan Reeves for more than you should want to. Again, you can't even sign Nick Robertson. Cody Ceci better than the Stanley Cup champ. When that Stanley Cup champ didn't do a whole hell of a lot to win that cup. I mean, he had 6 points in 24 games. Just saying. But hey, if you're impressed, clearly the Leafs were also impressed by the pedigree of Oliver Ekman-Larsson. So there you go. Overall, I got to be honest, the Leafs are in a very similar situation to the Edmonton Oilers, and I think the Edmonton Oilers are better. Hot take. Both teams have the high-paid star power at the top, have to do what they can to find the depth in the bottom 6, to find the depth on defense, to find the depth in goal. Right now, the Toronto Maple Leafs are the weaker version of the Edmonton Oilers. I don't think that's where you want to be. You know, maybe the Leafs win the Cup this year. I wouldn't be surprised with the talent they have. But again, that bottom 6 is being spread a little bit too thin. I think, you know, having the Kampf and Reeves cap hits when you could have players of similar skill levels for less, like you lost those negotiations. You did. Who the hell will be in Robertson's spot? Who knows, unless they find a way to keep him. We don't even know if Mitch Marner is going to be there. Defensively, it's not bad. In theory. What version of Yanni Hakanpää are you going to get? What version of Oliver Ekman-Larsson are you going to get? What version of Jake McCabe are you going to get? What version of Joseph Wall are you going to get? There's just so many fucking question marks about this team still. Whereas, again, we talked about the Oilers a little bit earlier on, and with the moves that they have made today with Victor Arvidsson, with Jeff Skinner, they have done a better job of, on paper, filling out those roles that needed to be addressed to help the Stars not have to carry their team on their backs to such an extreme extent, like Connor McDavid playing a fucking half an hour in Game 7 and being exhausted for the third period. So, time will tell for the Leafs, obviously. I can't envision a scenario where they don't make the playoffs. That would be a fucking disaster for them. But I don't know. It's hard to imagine that this is the year. At least while John Tavares is making $11 million. 25, 26, whatever. You bring Tavares back at $4 or $5 million, and then Marner gets paid 12, whatever the hell. Then maybe. But I just think, the big contracts at the top are squeezing the bottom six a bit too much. And even some of the contracts in the bottom six are squeezing a bit too much. David Kamp's a good bottom sixer, but man, you can't afford to pay that guy $2.4 million. You just can't. Like, he's a 20-point guy who's great in the dot and a defensive player. You shouldn't have to pay $2.4 million to get those players. And that's the thing. It's not just a David Kamp problem. Those pieces add up. So, I don't know, man. I don't know. The Leafs are interesting. And again, we don't know the full situation. Looks like Marner's going to stay, but then maybe he'll go. That's been the talk before, right? Like Montreal, we're not trading PK Subban. He gets dealt for Shea Weber. So, the Utah Hockey Club have made some moves. Obviously, Sergachev. They bring back Sean Durzi. They paid Sean Durzi big money too, $6 million for 4 years. That's banking on him being as good as he's been. Valimaki 2x2. Ian Cole 3.1 for the year. 2x2 for Stanley Cup champion Kevin Stenlund, and then Kevin Connaughton and Mikko Matika. Obviously, the new ownership's trying to make a splash and get this team into the playoffs for year one. There are some downsides to Utah. They don't have their full-time look. Their building, of course, isn't perfect for hockey. It's a basketball and concert venue, at least for now. But there's no doubt that ownership group is being like, here, what Bill Armstrong, as one of the better GMs in the league, wasn't getting in terms of help from ownership in Arizona, he is now getting here. And, of course, draft pick-wise, they're still set up very, very well. And when talking about this roster, there's some good pieces. There's still some concerning pieces, though. And this is what I wonder is just how much of a step are they going to take up, right? Because if Nick Bjugstad's your number one center, Barrett Hayton's not going to be that guy. Barrett Hayton is a third-pair defensive specialist at center. It's not what you want to get with a 5th overall pick, but that's what he is. How much of a step up does Logan Cooley take is the big question. How does this defense gel? This is Sergachev's chance to prove to Tampa, actually, I am worthy of being the number one guy here, and you fucked up trading me. But he is also coming off of that big-time injury, even though he came back from it very quickly. Sean Durzi, 41 points last year. He's looked good. But again, if you start to see a bit of a fall, that's a rough contract. The John Marino pickup was great. Like, they did so well kind of building this defense when they only had Shea Weber signed before the draft. And then Connor Ingram and Karl Vejmelka should be a decent enough tandem. Like, this is a team that can make the playoffs, but you got to get the best version of a lot of these guys. You're going to get your first full season of Josh Doan, which is nice, but you got to get the best version of Nick Bjugstad, the best version of Barrett Hayton, the best version and the healthy version of Mikhail Sergachev. So I think it's a team that pushes for the playoffs. Do they make it? I don't know. Obviously, ownership wants that fucking playoff money in season one, though, no doubt. Even if it's just 2 games. But the Arizona Coyotes were already in a good spot, so it's no surprise that the Utah Hockey Club is now in a good spot as well. The Vancouver Canucks, or a.k.a. the Vancouver Bruins, the Boston Canucks. Kiefer Sherwood, 2 years, 1.5. Good. Danton Heinen, 2 years, 2.25. Good. Jake DeBrusk, I said it was going to be Edmonton. I'm not surprised it's a Canadian team at all. 7 years, 5.5 for Jake DeBrusk. Derek Forbort, another former Bruin, 1.5 for the year. And then Yuri Patera from Vegas, Nathan Smith, and Vinny Desharnais, 2x2 from Edmonton. In terms of this roster, let's see what it looks like. Right? Outside of Shiloffs, everyone's signed, which is good. Top line, potentially. Of course, we don't know, is DeBrusk, JT Miller, Brock Besser. The big thing for Jake DeBrusk is consistency in the regular season, where he hasn't always been. But in the playoffs, he's a big-time performer, right? Like, he's a 40 to 50-point guy. We'll see where they play him. He shows up in the playoffs, for sure. which is something that the Canucks can definitely use, right? So I don't hate the idea of adding Jake DeBrusk for that team. I think he brings a lot. No surprise at all that he left the Bruins with as much word as there happened to be about, trade requests and stuff like that. It was bound to happen. Alvin said today they want him alongside Pettersson, but it's up to Tocchet. That'll be interesting. Obviously, they re-signed Dakota Joshua as well. I think that forward core is pretty damn solid. Like, where the left wingers happen to shake up, like, time will tell. It's not bad. But as was just said in chat, and as has been said a few times now, the Bruins basically dealt Forbort, Heinen, and DeBrusk for Zadorov and Lindholm. On paper, the Bruins win that non-existent transaction. But I still think the Canucks, after keeping Philip Hronek as well, it's not bad. And it's clear, too, like, their defense is fucking huge. Like, that is a clear directive from so many teams. Get big, get physical. Although the Canucks have been doing that for a while, right? Like, they're like, hey, Tucker Pullman, hey, whoever the hell we can bring in to try and make that work. Their defense is big. Their defense is physical, block a lot of shots. Like, they kept Tyler Myers around. Outside of that top pairing of Hughes and Hronek, like, that's a big fucking defense. And it should be. Like, you look at that roster, it should be a defensively responsible team. Colt, we finished the end of Wyoming. It'll be uploaded on the second channel soon. You have Thatcher Demko, which if he stays healthy, he should be good. Shilovs look great in the playoffs. Canucks should be a playoff team again. I think missing the playoffs would be an absolute disaster for them. I disagree with the take of them being worse. I disagree with the take of them being worse. I think Jake DeBrusk adds a different element that Lindholm didn't. I think, looking at what that roster was last year, right? We'll go with the 23-24 season. Give me that Vancouver roster, and we'll go off of point totals there, right? I mean, you lose Ilya Mikheyev, but you bring in Jake DeBrusk. You lost Sam Lafferty, Andrei Kuzmenko. I don't view those as gigantic losses. Kuzmenko, maybe. Losing Zadorov isn't great, but in terms of like the physicality and grit that he brings, they did try to replace that directly. Losing Lindholm, I agree, not great, but it wasn't always a perfect fit there. I don't feel like they're worse. Maybe they're not better, but I don't feel like they're necessarily worse. And given the money that they're paying like Dakota Joshua, I wouldn't be surprised to see Joshua get a chance. Second line, maybe. And who knows what other moves might still happen, right? I mean, they have some younger guys who might get an opportunity. Like I said, I don't think that they're worse. Are they better? I don't know. But I don't think that they're worse. They're going to be a playoff team again next year. So it is just interesting how Vancouver and Boston swapped a couple of pieces. Vegas obviously let go of Marchessault, Aston Reese, and Tanner Lashinsky for dirt cheap. Reese Johnson, Ilya Samsonov, 1 year, 1.8. 2 years, 1.8 for Pavel Dorofeyev to keep him. No major moves for Vegas, which is surprising. You might say, well, no, it's not because they don't have cap space. When the hell has that ever stopped Vegas before, right? I'm kind of surprised they haven't tried somehow, some way to be involved in anything major. They are still going to be a competitive team. They still have one of the best coaches in the league. They still have a pretty damn solid core. Unfortunately for Devils fans, Alex Holtz probably will get an opportunity to see if he can make it. It's always just next man up, next group of players up for Vegas. It's tough to imagine them not making the playoffs, right? That top four on defense, and really that defensive core in general, is still stellar. That is still a really good defensive core. Adin Hill, it's still weird to be like, how can't you trust Stanley Cup champion Adin Hill? Like, the goaltending might raise some questions. Robin Leonard's not coming back. But it's Vegas, man. They'll find a way. Whether or not they make another run, who knows? But it's Vegas. Like, I don't think you can rightfully tout Vegas and be like, they're not going to make the playoffs. I mean, maybe they won't, but that's a bold take as opposed to, like, the consistent take. Washington, Chase Prisky, Mitch Gibson, whatever. Connor McMichael, 2 years, 2.1. They brought in Brandon Duhaime, 2 years, almost $2 million. The big contract was Matt Roy on defense, 7 years at nearly $6 million, and then they also signed Taylor Radish for dirt cheap. Obviously, a lot of Washington's damage, which LOL to that right now, by the way. Nick Backstrom's going to go on LTIR. That's going to clear out a lot of it. The Capitals are in a pretty interesting spot compared to where they were just a few weeks ago. You are still paying Tom Wilson quite a bit of money. Ovi's contract still expensive, of course, but they got Andrew Mangiapane for a second-round pick. Dubois for the swap with Kemper. I mean, yeah, he's expensive, but you never know. He might finally click on this particular team. Hendrix Lapierre should make the team. Defensively, you added Chychrun in. You re-signed Sandin previously. You have Matt Roy now. That defense, on paper, not bad at all. That defense looks pretty damn good, actually. Goaltending has the potential to be one of the best tandems in the league, and it's for under $2 million, which is hilarious. The Logan Thompson acquisition is hilarious. And potentially, if Oshie doesn't play too, it opens up more spots. I don't know if they'll be a playoff team, but there's more optimism around the Capitals than there was just a few weeks ago, I would say. I'd certainly be more optimistic as a Caps fan. We look at that team a few weeks ago, and it's like, well, they got Ovi going for the record, and that's it. Now, all of a sudden, it's maybe they do make the playoffs and get absolutely stomped again, but maybe they do make the playoffs. It's definitely possible. Not too much else to add about them, though. Last but not least, the Winnipeg Jets. Capo Kakinen 1x1. Cheap deal for Eric Comrie and Colin Miller at 1.5. Nothing major from the Jets. They got to sign David Gustafson, Cole Perfetti, and Logan Stanley. New head coach this year as well, if I'm not mistaken, right? Arneal was just appointed recently, unless it was later than I thought. Yeah, it was May 24th as well. It's confusing him with the Bilesma one. Jets were a playoff team. They should still be a playoff team, unless they decide to move Ehlers or something like that. Like, they should still be a playoff team. Like, they bought out Nate Schmidt, replaced him with Colin Miller, just to have a cheaper third pair guy. I know a lot of Jets fans aren't hyped about Neil Pionk anymore. But you do have the reigning Vezina winner in goal, even if you lost his very stellar backup. It's not a bad roster. It's not. It's not a roster where you're just like, yep, they're Edmonton or Florida levels of contender. But it's really not a bad roster either. And when you look overall, right? Also, really quickly, no other signings marked down that we missed in all of that time. So I picked a pretty good time to start talking about stuff. That's good. $1.2 billion in contract dollars, huh? So if you look at the divisions, right? Obviously, this is from last year. Talking about the Atlantic. Florida Panthers, in terms of no surprise to see them in the playoffs next year. Florida, Boston, Toronto. I'd argue even Tampa. No one's surprised. I feel like the four teams on the outs, no one is you have absolutely no chance of making the playoffs, which makes it interesting. I think a lot of Red Wings fans, again, Red Wings, Sabres, Sens fans will be super disappointed if they don't make the playoffs. Habs fans, a little less so. I think they'd be overjoyed if they made it. I think most fans will realize, yeah, the Habs probably aren't going to make the playoffs, but like we talked about, a lot of young guys, a lot of optimism now moving forward. But is there, am I able to sit here and say there's 0% chance of the Habs making the playoffs? I can't say that with certainty. You never know, man. If a team like that could make the 8th seed or something like that, I feel like every single one of those teams in the Atlantic could be viewed as a playoff team. The top 3 absolutely have to make the playoffs, so the season's actually Tampa too. The top 4 teams that made the playoffs this past year absolutely have to make it again, or it's a disaster. Because for Tampa, it's Stamkos. You can't get rid of Stamkos and then miss the playoffs. That's a nightmare scenario. Your fan base will fucking turn on you fast as if they haven't already. Some of them. In the Metro, Rangers, disaster if they don't make the playoffs. Same for Carolina. But then it gets interesting. I'd say, too, for the Devils, it's a disaster if they don't make the playoffs based on all the moves they've made. Is it a disaster for the Islanders if they don't make it? Probably closer to it, but not like oh my God, a failure of a season. It's a failure of a season, but it's not like we're fucked forever. Penguins, it's a disaster if you don't make it. Caps fans, I think, would be happy if they did. But at the same time, be like, well, we tried for Dubois, didn't work, whatever. Flyers fans would be happy to make the playoffs, but at the same time, again, it's the young talent. And then Blue Jackets fans, I don't know what the hell they can expect this year, especially if Q ends up being their coach. So, interesting there. The problem for the Caps and the Penguins and the Flyers, for that matter, is that the Devils should be much fucking better this year. Top 4 teams in the Central, disaster if they don't make the playoffs. Especially Nashville, with the amount of buy-in here. Blues fans, I think, would be happy if they made it, but not surprised that they miss. Minnesota, disappointed if they don't make it, but not surprised. Utah, disappointed if they don't make it. Blackhawks fans, that's one team where you're just like, man, they're not making the playoffs. They're not. And that's okay. Like, the goal for Hawks fans this year, have fun watching Connor Bedard. Hope for a top 5 pick again next year. And that's perfectly fine. That's what should happen. They are easily the first team where it's just like, why are you complaining if you didn't make the playoffs? What'd you expect? Every other team in the Central? I'd argue every team in the Metro, and then maybe Montreal and the Atlantic. But again, they have a better chance of making the playoffs than Chicago, in theory. Could be proven wrong. And then for the Pacific, the Sharks are the team at the bottom of the totem pole. They're even lower than Chicago or Montreal in terms of like, man, you're aiming for another number 1 overall pick next year. That's what you're looking for. Anaheim was weird because it's like, oh, we're getting better, and then they sucked. It would benefit Anaheim to not be a playoff team and to get another top 10 pick. It would be. Calgary, could they? Yes, but it would be a surprise. Seattle, you could tell, desperately wants to make it back into the playoffs. And that means for the top 4, it would be a disaster if they don't make it. Especially LA. Like, oh, the upward trajectory, and then you make these big moves and you miss. Like, that's a bit scary. So, it's interesting, right? Like, this is what the NHL wants. It's a league of parity. And that's exactly what you're going to get, where there are a lot of teams that are going to miss the playoffs that could have made it. Absolutely. I don't think you're going to see, so many teams under 60 points or even under 70 or 80 points. Like, it's going to be close for a lot of these teams. And, you look last year, like Detroit missed by 7, which isn't the hugest gap in the world. Pittsburgh missed by 3, Philly by 4. You had St. Louis by 7. And then obviously the Pacific was a bit rocky from there. But that's the frustrating way to talk about the NHL right now, right? And this is what I started off this 2-hour rant podcast, whatever the hell you want to call this. Who's missing the playoffs that made it? That's actually a good season, or a good question. Hold on. Who was missing the playoffs that made it this year? Tried to have it give me the wild card standings, so the NHL website sucks. Oh, it did give me the wild card standings. If I had to bet, how do you feel about Ben and Seneca? We'll see. They might be right. They might be wrong. That's it. Like, I don't have hot takes about draft picks. The teams you look at as the most likely to miss the playoffs.
I'm just trying to walk through this fucking grass.
The Islanders are up there as a team that a lot of people would pick to not make the playoffs. Tampa and Washington as well. I think Tampa will make it. I know people are like, oh, Sergachev, but The bottom three, right? Islanders, Lightning, Caps. In terms of the order, Capitals most likely, Lightning least likely to miss the playoffs next year. Put the Islanders in the middle. The Western side, I think it's got to be LA. Like Vegas still looks good. Nashville looks a lot better. You could say Winnipeg. I think it's LA. It's the remnants of the Dubois decision, the goaltending. They lost Victor Arvidsson. I think LA might be the most likely team from the West to miss this upcoming year. Again, they only dropped Vegas down to the second wildcard spot by 1 point. So, in terms of most likely, least likely, most likely to miss the playoffs is Washington. Then I'd put the Kings, Islanders, Lightning, just because I'm a battered Bruins fan. I will never discount the Tampa Bay Lightning until it's proven that they should be discounted. But I have to have the Islanders above the Kings just because of the goaltending. You know? Again, the Kings goaltending this year is Kemper and Riddick. Islanders at least still have Sorokin and Varlamov. So, and I do favor good goaltending quite a bit, imagine. So, oh, goodness. Well, this was an interesting conversation. I will tell you that I am going to step back for a smidge and then probably come back and stream again. But all in all, like I said, the biggest story of the NHL today is that the reinstatement, right? The reinstatement's the biggest story. And that's the thing. Like, it's so fun to talk about free agency and stuff like that, but it's very typical of the NHL to be like, hey, let's talk about all these teams, and that's all well and good. It'd just be nice if the NHL could get their shit together so the hockey didn't have to be secondary, because free agency's fun as hell. Game 7 was fun as hell. But all in all, yeah, it's frustrating to be a hockey fan because it can't be like, hey, let's just enjoy the hockey. And I'm jealous of people that can, like I said. But yeah, I don't know when I'm going to talk hockey again. Maybe if like Mitch Marner gets traded or something. I don't know.